Do you think that Putin has changed? We've been watching him for 21 years. You were his prime minister
Well,
early
that
on
was
in his.
absolutely different Putin at that time. That was 20 years ago. That was absolutely different Putin. At that time, Putin supported democratic reforms, reforms in the economy, and that's at that time just we had economic growth of 7%, and we have there were a few cases of violation of human rights, but it not was a policy; it was some kind of mistakes. But on a later stage, of course, it's, now we see completely different Putin. At that time, there was pro-democratic Putin. And remember, we had excellent relations with the European Union and with the United States. And now just Putin called the West as our enemies. And even our military doctrine has been changed during the last 15 years. That is two completely different ways and two completely different policies. That's why I'm in a position, because I cannot accept any feature of this policy Mr. Putin started to pursue starting with 2008, 2007, 2008, when he just pronounced his speech in Munich conference. And then next year in 2008, there was a war in Georgia. And then as a result of not appropriate attitude to the Putin's behavior in Georgia, we got annexation of Crimea and the war in eastern Ukraine. That is everything is interconnected.
When you mentioned the Munich speech, was that the speech where he talked about the collapse of the Soviet Union being one of the biggest tragedies of the last century?
At that time, he warned the West that he wants his regime to be recognized as a decent one, and he wanted immediate recognizance on that, so that not to press him on human rights violations, etc. It was at that time, you remember, so-called sovereign democracy, and that was his understanding what democracy in Russia should be, and his personal interpretation of human rights and other features of democratic state. And the West didn't take it seriously. And next year, just on a NATO summit, Georgia and Ukraine was denied to get the roadmap for NATO potential future entry. And that was a signal for Mr. Putin just immediately start pressing. Just he understood that the West is not prepared to tackle the problems up here at that time.
If you say that the West has not dealt with him properly, didn't take his threat seriously, didn't really push and press and corner Russia in the past the way they should have, what should they do now? There are economic sanctions in place over Crimea and the Ukraine. There's been a lot of calls by people like Bill Browder to make them much tougher, to go after his inner circle. What is the answer?
I think the answer is very clear. Continue to believe that, I mean, for the Western leaders, continue to believe that you are absolutely correct in respecting democratic features of all your countries, and including neighbor countries like Ukraine and Russia including. And that's where Russia is a member of OECD, and Russia is a member of Council of Europe. And Russia must respect all those obligations. And of course, our partners, because the West is our partner in all those agreements, they should tell to us, to Russia, to Putin's regime, that is inappropriate behavior.
And but they have. They've denounced so many of the things that he's done, right, including the jailing of Navalny, the attempted poisoning of Navalny, the deployment of Novichok. Okay, so you tell him, then what?
Yeah, Mr. Putin wants finally that the West will be tired of that and come to compromise. That's what I'm saying. Continue to believe that Russia could be a normal country. Just this regime is temporal, and Mr. Putin have problems now just with the economy. And there is no single reform pursued right now. And even with the very good high prices on international markets, Russian economy cannot work appropriately, because just that is because of Putin's regime, because of political pressure, political squeezing of everything, unchangeable government on all levels, and because of huge corruption, and because of inability to pursue any economic and social reforms. That means just the regime is on a dire straits. That's why there is no need to support and pull out Mr. Putin's regime out of the problems he brought the country.
You're saying the international community should hold the line. You don't necessarily call for tighter sanctions. You say hold the line with existing sanctions, and that will accomplish what in the end?
Yeah, we all have just a list of misdeeds and all necessary reactions which West evaluated. All those reactions already given, done. If other misdeeds appear, that is for Western leaders to consider. I cannot prescribe just what should be done, but I'm just simply observing what's going on, and of course I'm standing on democratic principles and believe my country soon will be again democratic state and even better than before. But of course I'd like my people of my country would realize what's going on. And the Western leaders, the West, have no dual, I would say, standards. If the West announced we want Russia to be a democratic state, and by constitution, even by this changed constitution, I would say Western constitution, major aspects of democratic states still written there, but authorities don't respect them at all.
You say that you have hope for democracy in Russia and that you're hoping that soon Russia would become democratic again. It seems like you are slipping further and further away from at least the 90s, when there was a brief flirtation with a real democracy.
Of course, I am could be seen as a dreamer, but unfortunately today, as we started during the beginning of our discussion, we lost. I mean, the democratic movements in Russia lost the momentum of pressing authorities and bring them to changes, and that's why we're in a dark period. That's correct. That's a dark period, and that's why my I would say. Explanation of future changes looks like absolute dream. But I'm sure that not tomorrow, but soon, changes would come. Changes are inevitable.
You think changes are inevitable because the tougher the authorities get on Russian people, the greater the chance that people will not stand for it anymore? Russian people, I would say, realization or recognition of everything what's going on is maturing, and people coming to the right understanding where is the source of problems, who is responsible for. It's for internal part, and for external part. If West stay without compromises with this regime, it means just the situation stay as it is. But it's not stay as it is. With the same circumstances, with same conditions, but the regime would start weakening very rapidly. How rapidly? How rapidly?
Okay.
How rapidly?
How rapidly? How rapidly? We have so-called just elections. That's absolute imitation, which we always had an imitation of elections, but this will be absolute farce. And that will be another feature for people to take a note. And then we have just elections in 24. And during this period of time, just people's real income and the style of life and the whole atmosphere worsening very rapidly, and even morally, especially for middle class living in big cities. People simply hate everything what's going around. They just in a nervous situation, but they're afraid to go to the streets. They afraid to protect their constitutional rights on the streets by demonstration. But sooner or later, a wider part of population, bigger part of population, not necessarily educated people in the big cities, would also come to the conclusion they live in a very poor situation. The level of poverty, as I said, just very high right now. It's continued to increase, and that will be a maturing of negative attitude. And again, as I said, just if there is no support from outside, economic situation would contract, will decrease just very rapidly. It means changes could be in 1 year time, or could be in half a year time, or could be a 3 year time. But that's what the horizon which I describe from today's understanding of the reality.
Last question to you. I was shocked by a poll that Levada just did recently on how many people in different age groups in Russia want to leave the country.
That's exactly confirming what I have just said. You notice there, 48% of young people up to 25 years, half of young people would like to depart from Russia because they don't see future for themselves.
That is shocking by any.
And
I can't
35% of the most productive population, like 25 up to 40 years old. Each thought, just the thought of this part of population would like to depart, because people understand that repressions are going, and any attempt to protect your rights, just facing big problems, and that's why people just simply cannot fight with this. They are not prepared to fight with this repressive machine. That is disaster.
And unfortunately, hope is fading for a lot of people that there's going to be change sooner than later, and peaceful change. And because the hold by Putin and the Kremlin on society just seems never ending.
It could be, as I said, just very soon, just other sector of population, other part of population would start fighting for their rights, but not even for their rights, for their lives. That's coming to more dangerous development. That's your warning is absolutely correct. I agree and share your concerns on that. Unfortunately, authorities don't want to understand what's going on in the country and where we're heading to. Unfortunately, they just like closing eyes and we going in tunnel. And that is unfortunate development. And that is what, as you mentioned, Levada Center sociological polls just demonstrating what people's feeling is.
Mikhail Kasyanov, always a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was absolutely great. Thank you.